The San Diego Naval Base stirred like a beehive in the early morning light. Boots pounded against asphalt, echoing in regimented rhythm across the parade grounds. Helicopters hummed overhead, slicing the crisp coastal air, while the smell of salt, diesel, and metal clung to everything. Recruits jogged in formation, their synchronized steps clattering against the concrete as instructors barked orders sharp enough to make the waves shiver. Amid the chaos, a solitary figure moved slower than the rest. A man who seemed almost out of time, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane, his steps deliberate, measured. His bomber jacket was faded, threadbare at the elbows with a single patch sewn onto the chest, UDT 21. The letters were old, frayed, and yet still carried an unmistakable aura of authority. Most of the young recruits didn't notice. Some even smirked at the outdated emblem, unaware of the weight it bore. But at the security checkpoint of Gate B, the guard, a young petty officer with a rookie's cautious confidence, froze. "Sir," the guard began, shifting nervously, "this is a restricted area. You'll need identification." The old man didn't break stride. He held up a hand, fingers curled around the cane. His eyes, a pale gray that caught the morning sun, held a steady focus, and in them was a calm that seemed almost unshakable. "I know exactly where I'm going, son," he said quietly, voice thin but firm. "I've been here before." Before the guard could respond, the rhythmic sound of boots approached, punctuated with the casual arrogance of youth. A group of Navy SEALs, freshly sweaty from morning PT, jogged past the checkpoint. One of them, a tall, muscular man with a shock of blonde hair and a permanent smirk, slowed as he caught sight of the jacket. "Hey, look at this," he called out to the others, nudging one of his comrades. "UDT, seriously, that patch is older than my dad. What are you, a relic?" The old man didn't flinch, didn't even glance down. He just walked past them, cane clicking softly on the concrete. The guard felt a twinge of unease, though he couldn't explain why. There was a weight in the old man's posture, a history carried in his shoulders that the SEALs, young, brash, and untouchable, couldn't perceive. The blonde SEAL, Carter Briggs, laughed and took a step closer. "Come on, old-timer. Did you dive into history or something? UDT, prehistoric diving squad, right?" The old man stopped mid-stride. He turned slowly, lifting his eyes to meet Carter. For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the wind stirring the corner of the bomber jacket. Then, in a voice that was low and firm, carrying the weight of decades, he said, "Son, I wore this patch before most of you were born." Carter's laughter faltered. The air between them thickened. Something in the tone, not the words, made the young SEAL's bravado feel hollow. The guard noticed a tremor in the air, like the calm before a storm. Then the old man reached into his jacket. All movement slowed. The guard instinctively stepped back. Carter straightened, chest puffing, preparing to dismiss whatever the old man pulled out as some prop or antique. But what came out of the pocket wasn't a toy, wasn't a relic. It was a photograph. Grainy, black and white, and faded at the edges, the photo depicted several men in wetsuits, standing beside a submarine. Their expressions were serious, eyes locked on the camera with the quiet intensity of men who had seen too much. On the back, scrawled in almost illegible handwriting, "Operation Crosswind, 1951. Carter frowned, leaning in. "What is that, a movie prop?" A younger SEAL whispered, nudging him, "Dude, UDT became the SEALs. That's history. That's the real deal." Carter waved him off, smirking, though the edge of uncertainty had crept into his voice. Yeah. Next he's gonna claim he founded the SEALs or something." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't smile. He didn't scold. He simply said, "I'm not here for your respect." Then he shifted his gaze beyond the group, toward the command building at the center of the base. "I'm here to bury someone." The words landed like stones thrown into a still pond. The SEALs froze, exchanging nervous glances. Carter chuckled nervously, but it came out hollow. The guard at the gate instinctively gripped his baton tighter. Something in that sentence, in the way it fell from the old man's lips, carried a weight that the young men could not measure. The old man's hands, gnarled and veined, gripped the cane with a sudden intensity. His jaw tightened. For the first time, a shadow of strain crossed his weathered features. Not from age, not from exhaustion, something else, something heavy and relentless pressed down on him. Carter, sensing a shift he didn't understand, tried to lighten the mood. All right, all right. Look, Grandpa, the base is open and all, but he waved vaguely at the patch. You really don't need to freak everyone out with your history lessons. The old man's gaze sharpened, his eyes flashing with a memory too vivid to dismiss. Son, he said quietly, each syllable deliberate, what I carry is not a lesson, it's a promise, and some promises, they follow you your entire life. Carter blinked, unsure what to say. The laugh had died on his lips. The guard looked at him, then at the old man, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. A sudden wind picked up, tugging at the bomber jacket, rustling the patch on the chest. The sound of helicopter blades faded for a moment, replaced by an almost audible tension in the air. For a fleeting heartbeat, the base itself seemed to pause, an invisible line drawn between the present and something far older, far darker. Then the old man straightened, his hand brushing against the cane. He took a step forward, slow, deliberate and steady. His every movement radiated authority, a history of command and discipline that demanded recognition even without words. Watch closely, he murmured almost to himself, because what comes next will not wait for anyone. Carter's smirk returned, though weaker, nervous. He looked at his SEAL buddies, shrugged, and whispered, "Whatever, old man, let's just go." But the guard lingered, watching the old man disappear toward the command building. He had the sinking feeling that something monumental, something the base had never seen in decades, was about to unfold. And as the old man's figure receded into the morning haze, a subtle ripple seemed to move through the assembled SEALs. A quiet, almost imperceptible tension, as though the air itself was holding its breath. In that brief, charged silence, Carter couldn't know it, but the joke he made would echo across the base in ways no one could predict. Because this old man, Commander Miles Graham, was not just history. He was the key to something buried, forgotten, and deadly. And the moment he stepped inside the gate, the world of the young SEALs, the guards, and the entire base shifted, teetering on the edge of a story that would test their courage, loyalty, and the very limits of what they thought they knew about heroism. Somewhere deep inside, Carter felt it, a whisper of fear, respect, and awe. And he didn't even realize it yet, but nothing at the base would ever be the same. The morning sun climbed higher, glinting off the glass windows of the command building, casting long shadows across the parade ground. Inside, the hum of computers and the clatter of keyboards barely masked the tension that had begun to coil through the base. Carter Briggs and his fellow SEALs had followed the old man, Commander Miles Graham, at a distance, trying to maintain a balance between curiosity and discipline. Carter's laughter from earlier felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a creeping unease that refused to leave his gut. He glanced at his teammates, young, fit, fearless, or at least they thought they were. Their eyes, usually full of bravado, darted nervously between the old man and the bustling base around them. Something about Graham unsettled them, something beyond his age or frailty. As they drew closer to the command building, Graham stopped abruptly, leaning heavily on his cane. Carter almost collided with him, forcing a hand to steady himself. "Sir, are you okay?" Carter asked, his voice stripped of mockery. Graham turned slowly, eyes sharp, piercing. "I've been better," he admitted, his voice rough like sandpaper. "But today is not about me." Carter frowned. "Then what is it about?" The old man's gaze drifted past him again, toward the entrance of the building, where several officers were beginning to notice the commotion. "About promises," Graham said softly. "About men left behind. about things that should have been finished decades ago. A young lieutenant who had been observing from a nearby doorway stepped forward. "Sir, may I assist you? Are you authorized to be here?" Graham didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something from inside his jacket, a photograph, the same one he had shown at the gate, and held it up so that the lieutenant could see. The image of the wetsuit-clad divers and the submarine earned a sharp intake of breath from the young officer. "Operation Crosswind," the lieutenant whispered, his eyes widened. "Commander, you were part of this." Graham nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "Yes, and some of the men in this photo never came home." Carter, still standing nearby, frowned. "Wait a second, you mean?" "Yes," Graham interrupted, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "They were UDT-21, my unit. We were sent on missions no one remembers, and some of them were taken, turned into weapons, erased from the books. I've been looking for them ever since." The lieutenant paled, exchanging a look with the other officers. "Commander, you're saying these men—" "They are still out there," Graham said quietly, "and they're coming back." A ripple of unease spread through the room. Carter felt it crawl up his spine, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. He had faced fear before in training and missions, but this was different. This wasn't a threat he could gauge, calculate, or neutralize. It was a ghost from the past, rising to reclaim the present. One of the younger SEALs, barely out of boot camp, stepped forward nervously. "Sir, if these men are still active, why are they here now?" Graham's eyes flickered with pain. "Because I never stopped looking for them, and because someone or something remembers me and the orders I gave." Carter's mind raced. He had heard stories of old units, classified operations, and Black Ops missions, but this was something else. Something that had existed in the shadows while the world moved on, and now it was surfacing. Graham's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the photograph. "I'm here to warn you," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Whatever you see, whatever you think is impossible, believe it, and stay alive." Before anyone could respond, Graham suddenly stiffened. Carter noticed it immediately. The old man's eyes darted to the entrance of a nearby corridor. Something invisible had arrived, something Graham recognized instantly. "Carter," Graham rasped, voice urgent, "you need to listen. They follow the orders I gave, and when they see me, they'll act." Carter froze. "Act how?" "They're not here for you. Not yet," Graham said, his eyes narrowing. "They're here for me, and if I fail—" he let the words hang, heavy with unspoken consequences. At that moment, a loud crash echoed from the rear of the building. Metal clanged against concrete, followed by the unmistakable hiss of pressurized hydraulics. Officers scattered, shouting orders, but Graham remained rooted to the spot, his gaze locked on the corridor. "They're here," he whispered. Carter's pulse quickened. "Who, what?" Graham's lips pressed into a thin line. "The men I left behind, the ones I thought I'd never see again, the ones who were taken." Suddenly, the old man's knees buckled. His cane slipped from his hand as he sagged to the floor. Carter lunged forward instinctively, catching him before he hit the ground. "Sir," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. The old man's breath came in shallow gasps, and Carter could see the color draining from his face. "Medic! Someone get a medic!" A corpsman arrived moments later, checking Graham's pulse. "He's weak," the medic said, shaking his head. "We need to get him stabilized now." Graham's hand twitched, grabbing Carter's wrist with surprising strength. "Listen," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "You must find Admiral Brooke. Tell him I kept my promise." Carter swallowed hard, unsure of what he was hearing. "Promise, sir, what promise?" Graham coughed violently, his eyes flashing with a strange intensity. "The mission, it's not over. They are already here, and they will not stop." The medic worked quickly, administering oxygen and stabilizing the old man as Carter knelt beside him, heart racing. The room had descended into chaos. Officers were running, shouting into radios, and a low hum of panic filled the air. Yet, in that moment, all Carter could focus on was the weight of the old man's words. "They're already here." Carter's stomach twisted. His mind struggled to reconcile the man before him, frail, struggling to breathe, with the legend he had just glimpsed in the photograph. UDT-21, Operation Crosswind, Forgotten Soldiers, Taken Men. And now they were back. The medic straightened, giving Carter a stern look. "We've got him. You need to move, or this place is going to go to hell if whatever's out there decides to escalate." Carter nodded, reluctantly stepping back as Graham was lifted onto a stretcher. His eyes met the commander's one last time. There was an unspoken weight in that gaze, a mixture of fear, resolve, and something else Carter couldn't name. Something like history itself, pressing down on the present. As the stretcher moved toward the elevator, Carter caught a glimpse of Graham's lips moving silently, forming words that disappeared before he could hear them. And yet, Carter knew, somehow, that the message was meant for him alone. A sudden alarm blared, slicing through the morning chaos. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the intercom crackled with a voice Carter didn't recognize. "Security breach at Pier 9. All units respond." Carter's heart thudded. "Pier 9, that's where the patrol boats are. Something happening." The lieutenant grabbed his shoulder. "Briggs, get your team now." Carter hesitated, glancing at the medic and the stretcher carrying Graham. "Is he?" The medic shook her head. "Barely hanging on, go." Carter exhaled sharply. He didn't know why he obeyed so instantly, why the weight of Graham's words pressed down on him harder than any command. But instinct and fear collided in perfect synchronicity. He rallied his SEAL team and sprinted toward Pier 9, the tension in the base mounting with every step. Behind him, the stretcher moved slowly, Graham's cane left abandoned on the floor. Carter didn't look back, but he could feel it, the old man's presence lingering, like a shadow that refused to leave. A shadow that knew more than anyone in that building, a shadow that had already seen what was coming. And as Carter and his team disappeared toward the pier, a chill swept through the command building, brushing past every officer and recruit. The kind of chill that whispered, "History is not dead. History is coming." And it was about to drown them all. The sound of alarms echoed across the base, a shrill chorus of urgency cutting through the morning fog. Red lights flashed over the parade grounds, bouncing off the windows of the command building and reflecting in the wide eyes of scattered personnel. Carter Briggs and his SEAL team sprinted toward Pier 9, their boots pounding against the asphalt like thunderclaps, muscles burning, adrenaline surging. Every instinct screamed danger, every nerve was on edge, but none of it could have prepared them for what awaited. Back at the command building, the medic worked frantically on Commander Miles Graham, now pale as the rising sun and slick with sweat. The stretcher rocked under the weight of the old man's failing body. His breaths came shallow and erratic, punctuated by occasional gasps that seemed to draw the entire room's attention. Officers hovered anxiously, but Graham's gaze remained fixed on the doorway, as though he could already see the threat approaching, invisible to everyone else. "His pulse is weak," the medic said, her voice tight. "If we don't stabilize him immediately, we could lose him." Graham's eyes flickered toward Carter as he reached him, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his lips despite the strain on his features. "Carter, listen to me carefully," he rasped. "They've followed orders I gave decades ago. I thought I could contain them. I was wrong. You must stop them, whatever it takes." Carter's throat went dry. "Sir, what are you talking about? Orders? Stop who?" Graham coughed violently, gripping the edge of the stretcher with trembling hands. "The men, my men, UDT-21, taken, reprogrammed, forgotten, Blackfin, they are weapons now, and they are already here." A shiver ran down Carter's spine. He had faced dangers most men couldn't imagine, live fire exercises, hostage rescues, simulated combat, but nothing had ever felt like this. This was history coming to life, a shadow from the past returning to claim its due. The medic adjusted the oxygen mask over Graham's face, her eyes flicking to the monitors. "We need to move him to the med bay," she said. "Now." Graham shook his head slightly, his eyes narrowing with urgency. "No, not yet, you need to see." Carter glanced down the corridor, heart pounding. "See what?" But Graham's hand shot up suddenly, clutching Carter's arm with unexpected strength. "Carter, do not go alone. Watch your team. Trust no one you don't see. They are trained to kill and they do not remember mercy." The alarm blared again, louder this time, shaking the walls. Carter's mind raced. Blackfin, the name echoed in his memory, whispered in old legends, something from the darkest corners of naval history that many dismissed as myth. The divers were supposed to be gone, their missions buried under decades of secrecy. Yet Graham's words confirmed the impossible. They had returned. "Sir," Carter said, voice tight with fear and determination, "we have to move you now. Med Bay, you'll be safe there." Graham's lips quivered and he managed a faint nod. "Go, go, don't let them. Finish the mission, Ika." The medic and another corpsman lifted Graham carefully, securing the stretcher with straps. Carter followed, his eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement in the hallways. The building felt different now, smaller, more claustrophobic, as though the weight of the past pressed down on the concrete and steel around them. Then came the sound, a faint, almost imperceptible drip of water echoing through the corridor. Carter froze. The hair on his arm stood on end. He signaled to his team to halt. "What is it?" one of the younger SEALs whispered. "Listen," Carter said, voice barely audible. "Something here." The drip turned into a steady rhythm, like footsteps, slow and deliberate, but too heavy to be human. Carter's instincts screamed that they were not alone. He gestured for the team to spread out, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning every corner. Suddenly, a shadow moved against the wall, silent, fluid, and impossibly fast. Carter's pulse skyrocketed as he raised his rifle. The shadow disappeared and the air seemed to thicken, charged with anticipation. Graham groaned softly from the stretcher. They know I'm here." Carter's stomach twisted. "They who, sir?" "They were my men once," Graham whispered, voice hoarse. "Before the orders, before the world forgot them." The stretcher rattled as the medic adjusted the straps. Carter's eyes flicked to the old man, taking in the lines etched into his face, the hands scarred by decades of service, the eyes that had seen things no one alive could comprehend. This was not just a man. This was a living legend, a commander whose decisions had shaped lives and destinies, now lying vulnerable before them all. A sudden, sharp, metallic sound echoed down the hallway, like the slicing of steel through water. Carter froze. "What was that?" whispered a SEAL. Carter's gaze darted toward the source. "I don't know, but stay close. Don't leave anyone behind." The medic nodded, tightening her grip on the stretcher handles. "We're moving," she said firmly. "Step carefully." They advanced slowly, every movement precise, every footstep measured. The walls seemed to close in, the corridor stretching into infinity as tension coiled tighter around them. Then another sound, this time unmistakable, the echo of a human voice, distorted and cold, calling out from somewhere deep within the building. "Commander Graham." Carter's blood ran cold. That voice, deep, metallic, and strangely familiar, belonged to someone who should have been dead, someone whose very existence defied reason. Graham's eyes fluttered open, fixed on Carter. "They remember the orders. I failed them once. Don't fail me again." Carter's hand tightened on his rifle, knuckles white. "Sir, I won't, I promise." But the promise felt fragile against the impossible reality pressing in around them. The voice called again, this time closer, echoing off the concrete walls. "Commander Graham." Carter turned, scanning the hallway. There, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. A diver's suit, black and unmarked, glistening as if wet, even though the corridor was dry. The mask hid the face, but the posture, rigid, precise, spoke volumes. Every instinct Carter had screamed danger. "They're here," Graham whispered, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Blackfin, they followed me, decades later, and they remember every order." The figure moved forward with terrifying silence, and Carter realized with a shock that it was not alone. Two more emerged from the shadows, their movements synchronized, mechanical, terrifying. The medic froze, eyes wide. "Carter, what are they?" Carter's jaw tightened. I don't know, but they're real, and they're coming for him." Graham's hand shot up from the stretcher, trembling. "No, you must stop them." The figures advanced, step by deliberate step, until they were within striking distance. The air felt thick, electric, like a storm poised to strike. Carter raised his weapon, every muscle taut, every breath measured. And then the impossible happened. The first diver paused. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his mask, and the face beneath was unmistakable, scarred, weathered, but alive. "Commander," Graham's voice broke as recognition flared in his eyes. The diver nodded, silence holding the room hostage. Carter felt his heart pound in his chest, realization dawning. These were not just enemies. They were the men Graham had left behind. Forgotten soldiers, ghosts of a war long buried, now returned in perfect, terrifying form. The hallway became a tableau of tension. Graham on the stretcher, his breath shallow. Carter with rifle ready, mind racing. The divers, perfectly trained, utterly silent, awaiting a command only they could remember. And then Graham spoke, voice trembling but steady. "I'm here, it's over. No more missions, no more suffering." But the divers did not move. Their eyes, hidden behind the masks, seemed to lock onto him, waiting for the fulfillment of orders that no longer made sense in a world that had long moved on. Carter's pulse thundered. Every training, every mission, every instinct screamed at him to act. But this was beyond anything he had faced. And in that charged silence, as alarms blared and the base seemed to hold its breath, Carter understood the terrifying truth. Whatever came next, it would not wait. And Graham, the legend, the hero, the man who had carried the past like a weight heavier than any armor, he might not survive it. The shadow of history had returned. And it had a mission. The alarms had become a deafening roar, echoing off the concrete walls of the San Diego Naval Base. Red lights strobing across the buildings painted everything in a chaotic, urgent glow, reflecting off the polished boots of sailors scrambling to respond. Carter Briggs and his SEAL team barreled down the asphalt, muscles screaming from the sprint, rifles held at the ready. Their eyes darted to every shadow, every movement, every corner. Every instinct told them something unimaginable was happening, and it was heading straight toward Pier 9. Behind them, the stretcher-carrying Commander Miles Graham trundled awkwardly, guarded by the medic and a couple of officers. Graham's breaths were ragged, shallow, each exhale a battle against his failing body. His eyes, though dimming from exhaustion and age, burned with a strange intensity, as though he could see something that everyone else could not. Carter's mind raced. Blackfin, forgotten soldiers, UDT-21, taken, reprogrammed, weaponized. It all felt impossible. History didn't return. War didn't come back decades later. And yet, Graham's warning lingered in his mind, an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. They're already here. The team turned a corner and the smell hit first. Salt, fuel, metal, scorched wood. The acrid tang of something burning, something metallic. Carter's stomach knotted. The pier came into view and his heart dropped. The patrol boat moored at the end of the pier was in ruins. Its cabin doors ripped off, glass shattered across the deck. Smoke curled lazily from a gaping hole along the hull, mingling with the salty sea air. No crew, no explanation, just a floating skeleton of a vessel that had been attacked with surgical precision. Carter's breath caught. What the hell happened here? He muttered under his breath. One of the SEALs, a younger man named Ortiz, ran closer, eyes wide as he scanned the wreckage. "It's like someone boarded it and took everything." No, wait, they neutralized the crew. no struggle, no fire, just silence. Carter's eyes narrowed, scanning the water around the pier. Then came the flash of movement, three figures rising from the water. Wet, black suits, unmarked, movements precise, coordinated, like sharks gliding silently through the depths. They approached the boat as if it were their own. "They're diving operators," Ortiz whispered. "No, not just operators, ghosts." Carter's mind raced. Blackfin, the rogue unit Graham had mentioned. Stories he'd dismissed as legends now stood before him in wet, menacing reality. The figures boarded the boat, their movements deliberate, almost inhumanly smooth. They cut the power, secured the controls, and disappeared into the interior. Every action was precise, silent, terrifying. Carter swallowed hard. This looks like Blackfin," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Blackfin," Ortiz echoed, disbelief coloring his tone. Carter's pulse thundered in his ears. Cold War ghost story, supposed to be dissolved decades ago, gone, but it's real. They're here. From behind them, Admiral Brooke arrived in a black SUV, stepping onto the pier with a grim expression. Her eyes swept over the destruction, taking in the wreckage and the figures moving with lethal precision. This is not standard protocol," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Who's responsible for this breach?" Carter stepped forward. "Admiral, it's them. Blackfin. Graham warned us. They're following the only orders they remember. They've been reactivated somehow." The Admiral's brow furrowed. "Reactivated? That unit was disbanded. They were," she paused, swallowing, eyes narrowing as she studied the pier. "Damn it, he's right. This is operational, coordinated, impossible. Prepare to engage. Contain them before they do any more damage." Carter felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Engage. These weren't just rogue soldiers. They were ghosts from a past no one alive had truly seen, and they were deadly. The team approached the boat cautiously, weapons ready, eyes scanning every hatch, every doorway, every shadow. The metallic tang of blood mingled with the saltwater scent, making their stomachs churn. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, rhythmic. Footsteps. Carter froze. "Do you hear that?" The medic nodded, clutching her medical bag like a shield. "It's them. They're still inside." The first diver appeared on the deck, water dripping from his black suit, mask hiding his face. Carter raised his rifle, heart hammering in his chest. The diver moved with precision, hands empty, stance threatening but controlled. He was scanning, calculating, waiting. Carter whispered to Ortiz, "Hold position. Don't fire unless they attack. We need intel first." The second and third divers emerged, flanking the first, forming a triangle of silent menace. Their masks reflected the flashing red alarms, hiding expressions but exuding intent. Carter's mind spun, trying to reconcile the impossible. Men from decades past, dead or missing, now standing alive before him, moving as if time had never touched them. Then came the recognition. One of the divers stopped, lifted his mask slowly, and Carter's stomach dropped. The face beneath was unmistakable, scarred, weathered, but alive. "Commander," Graham's voice came to Carter's ears, hoarse and trembling from the stretcher he had left behind. Carter turned, saw Graham watching through the medic's shoulder. Recognition, relief, fear, all mingled in the old man's pale, wrinkled face. The diver, Graham's old subordinate Hendricks, nodded once, a single motion loaded with decades of unspoken history. Carter felt every instinct scream danger, but he also realized something terrifying. These men were not enemies in the traditional sense. They were loyal, to a command long forgotten, to a mission that no longer had relevance, but their orders were still active. They're his men," Ortiz whispered, voice barely audible. "The ones he said were lost, reprogrammed, weaponized." Carter nodded, tight-lipped, fingers white on the stock of his rifle. "Yeah, and right now they see Graham, and they remember exactly what to do." Graham's eyes darted to Carter, panicked but resolute. I cannot stop them. Not alone, you must." The divers advanced. Their movements deliberate, each step synchronized, silent as death. Carter felt his chest tighten. He was trained for combat. He had faced hostile enemies before. But these were ghosts from history, obeying commands they didn't understand, driven by orders given decades ago. Admiral Brooks' voice cut through the tension, steady but commanding. "Contain them, protect the pier, neutralize the threat." Carter's pulse raced. "Admiral, we can't just fight them. They're not normal. They won't stop unless Graham gives the command. They'll kill him first if we try to intervene." The diver nearest Graham stopped, lifting the mask fully. His eyes were cold, determined, and full of history. Carter's mind registered the impossible. Graham's old unit, forgotten for decades, had returned with a single mission. And Carter realized with a sinking certainty that the mission's target was the man lying on that stretcher. Graham's hand twitched as he muttered under his breath. "Orders, final orders. They must be fulfilled or I—" "Sir," Carter said urgently, stepping closer. "Listen to me. I won't let them harm you, not now, not ever." Graham's lips trembled into a faint smile. "Carter, you don't understand. They don't see me as a man anymore. Only a mission, only an objective, only." The first diver raised a hand slowly. A signal. The other two mirrored it perfectly. Carter's heart pounded. Every second stretched, heavy with tension. The water lapped quietly against the pier, contrasting sharply with the roaring alarms and the pounding of his own pulse. Carter's mind raced for options, for strategies, for anything that could prevent the impending violence. And then in that split second, Graham's eyes locked on his own. Determination. Command. A lifetime of leadership condensed into a single glance. "They trust you," Graham whispered, faint but unwavering. "You must lead them, or they will follow through." Carter swallowed hard. The impossible weight of the moment bore down on him. Time slowed, every sound hyperreal. The divers advanced one deliberate step at a time, the red lights flashing across their masks, reflecting decades of forgotten missions and dead commands. And in that instant, Carter realized, history wasn't just coming back, it was alive. And Graham's life, and perhaps the entire base, hung on the edge of the next heartbeat. The silence before the storm was deafening. The salty wind whipped across Pier 9, carrying the acrid tang of burnt metal and the faint smell of gunpowder. Carter's eyes never left the three figures moving with unnerving precision. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring, every nerve screaming at him that the slightest mistake would cost lives. He could hear the waves slapping against the pier, small ripples contrasted sharply by the thunderous pounding of his pulse. His team flanked him, rifles raised, fingers twitching on triggers, eyes wide. Every second stretched into eternity. And all the while the divers, Graham's lost men, moved silently, fluidly, an unstoppable force, their black suits gleaming under the flashing red alarms. Carter's gaze shifted back to Graham on the stretcher, the old man's eyes locked on him with a fierce intensity. Despite his frailty, despite the shallow, labored breathing, there was a spark there, a command, a challenge, a trust. The kind of trust that transcended generations, missions, and decades of war. "You need to understand," Graham rasped, voice barely audible over the alarms and wind. "They will not stop unless the orders are reaffirmed. You must give them a command they can understand, or they will complete their objective." Carter's jaw tightened. "I hear you, sir, but what command? How do I—" Before Graham could answer, the lead diver, Hendricks, raised a hand, signaling the other two. Their movements were so synchronized it was as though they were a single organism, a shadow of the past come to life. Carter's mind raced. This wasn't just an attack. It was a test, a ritual, an execution of a decades-old mission. The pier groaned under the wind and the pounding of the waves, a perfect stage for a confrontation that felt both epic and intimate. Carter took a steadying breath, trying to piece together what he knew. These men were trained beyond human limits, loyal beyond reason, and operating under orders from a commander who had spent a lifetime buried in secrecy. "You're the one," Graham croaked, a bead of sweat trailing down his temple. "You lead them now." Carter swallowed hard, heart hammering. The weight of history pressed down on him like the ocean itself. He raised his rifle slowly, not as a weapon, but as a tool of command, a symbol of authority. "Hendricks," he called out, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Stop! Stand down!" The diver froze, then tilted his head slightly as though hearing but not fully understanding. Carter stepped closer, lowering the rifle just enough to signal control without threat. "I'm in command now. The mission is over. Follow me." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Hendricks gave a slow nod, almost imperceptible. The other two mirrored him perfectly. Carter's pulse didn't slow, but for the first time he felt a fragile thread of control. "Move them away from Graham," Carter shouted to Ortiz and the rest of his team. They quickly repositioned, forming a protective barrier around the stretcher while keeping the divers within sight. The lead diver stepped closer to Graham, hand extended, palm open in a gesture that was both reverent and mechanical. Graham's eyes softened, and he reached out weakly, brushing Hendricks's gloved hand. For a moment, the decades between them disappeared, lost brothers reunited in silence, bound by a mission that had outlived its time. Graham's voice trembled. "You remember orders, but not the world. You must adapt, survive." Carter could barely process the scene. The divers, once deadly weapons, ghosts of a forgotten war, stood at attention, waiting for direction. And Graham, the man who had borne the burden of their fate for decades, was now vulnerable, frail, and reliant on him. "Admiral Brooke," Carter called over his shoulder, "we need evac and containment. These men, these soldiers, they're not hostile, not in the conventional sense. They're following old orders. We can't just fight them." The admiral, standing tensely at the edge of the pier, nodded sharply. "Understood, Briggs. Secure Graham. We'll handle containment and extraction. But make no mistake, if they move aggressively, engage. Contain at all costs." Carter's mind raced. Engage, contain. He couldn't risk it. Not yet. Not with these men, living relics of a mission that should have remained buried. The divers shifted, moving in unison as if responding to an invisible conductor. Hendricks's gaze flicked to Carter, searching for the command that would override decades of ingrained loyalty. Carter squared his shoulders, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "The mission is over," he said, voice firm, carrying authority. "You are to return to standby. No harm will come to Commander Graham. Follow my orders. Do you understand?" For a tense moment, the only sound was the wind and the creaking of the pier. Then, slowly, Hendricks gave a single nod, the other two following suit. Carter exhaled, muscles loosening slightly. Graham coughed violently and Carter moved to support him. "Sir, you're safe now," he said. The old man's eyes glimmered with relief and pride. "Yes, yes, you did it," the orders finally obeyed. Carter glanced at his team, then back at the divers. They remained silent, obedient shadows of a mission that had outlasted time itself. It was almost surreal, the calm after the storm, yet the tension lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed from the other side of the pier. Carter's head snapped around. A group of officers was approaching, armed and tense. Among them was a familiar figure, Commander Royce, Graham's old rival and now a high-ranking intelligence officer. His eyes narrowed at the scene before him. "What is going on here?" Royce demanded, voice cutting through the tension. "Why are Blackfin operatives here? Who authorized this?" Carter took a steadying breath. "They're not hostile, not in the conventional sense. They were under Graham's command decades ago, following orders they remember. I had to intervene, direct them, or Graham would have been at risk." Royce's eyes flicked to Graham on the stretcher. Recognition, shock, and something darker crossed his features. "Graham, I thought you were." Dead, Graham rasped, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the weakness. Thought so, yes. But orders, they never die, they follow you even decades later. The tension was far from over. Royce's expression hardened. This is highly irregular. We need a full debrief, containment protocols, and he paused, glancing at Hendricks and the others. We need to determine if they are compromised, reprogrammed. Anything could have happened during their disappearance. Carter nodded. Understood, sir, but right now they are following orders. Calm, obedient. No immediate threat provided Graham's protected. Graham coughed, turning his gaze toward Carter. You did well, Briggs, perhaps, better than I ever could. His voice faded, replaced by shallow breaths, but pride and trust shone in his eyes. The medic adjusted the stretcher, securing Graham for transport. The divers remained still, a silent, imposing presence. They were no longer ghosts, they were reminders, living testaments to a past that refused to be forgotten. Carter's eyes met Hendricks's one last time. Recognition, respect, a bridge between generations of soldiers forged in the shadow of a forgotten mission. And then, without warning, Hendricks gave a slight nod and moved backward toward the water, signaling the others to follow. They disappeared silently, like shadows dissolving into the sea, leaving Carter, his team, and Graham standing on the battered pier. The alarms continued to blare, the red lights flashing, but the immediate danger had passed. For now. Carter exhaled, muscles trembling, adrenaline slowly ebbing. Sir, he said softly, turning to Graham, you're safe, for now at least. Graham's eyes closed briefly and then opened again, a faint, weary smile forming. History never forgets, but you reminded them. Carter nodded, feeling the weight of the day settle on his shoulders. He had faced death, impossible odds, and the echoes of history itself, and he had survived. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Because the past had returned. And the mission was far from over. The base was quiet now, but the calm was deceptive. The storm of alarms and flashing lights had faded, leaving only the distant hum of the harbor and the occasional shout of a late-arriving officer. Carter Briggs stood on Pier 9, watching the water where Hendricks and the other two divers had vanished, waves reflecting the morning sun in shimmering streaks of silver. He could still feel the weight of their presence, the eerie precision of their movements, and the suffocating sense that history had a heartbeat, and it had just passed through him. Graham was being moved onto a waiting ambulance, each step slow and measured. His breaths were shallow, but his eyes, once blazing with command, now held a flicker of something more personal, relief, gratitude, and a lingering ache for lives lost and missions unfinished. Carter followed close behind, shoulder to shoulder with Ortiz and the rest of the SEALs. The old man had survived the impossible, but Carter knew better than to relax. The past didn't leave quietly. It lingered, waiting for its moment to resurface. Inside the ambulance, the medic checked Graham's vitals. He's stable for now, she said, voice calm but edged with concern. But he needs rest, fluids, monitoring. He's older than anyone here gives him credit for, and he's pushed himself harder than he should have. Graham's hand twitched toward Carter. You handled it well, better than I ever could. His voice was raspy, but there was pride in every word. Promise, you'll watch them, keep them safe. Carter nodded, gripping the old man's hand gently. I will, sir, I promise. Outside, the base was coming back to life. Officers were surveying the damage at Pier 9, talking urgently into radios and securing the area. Carter's team regrouped nearby, exchanging tense glances. None of them had expected the morning to turn into a confrontation with ghosts, men who had vanished from history and returned like specters to complete a mission written decades ago. Admiral Brooke approached, her expression unreadable, a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Briggs, she said, voice firm, report. What happened? Carter exhaled slowly, recounting the events in precise detail, from the moment Graham arrived at the gate to the controlled confrontation with Hendricks and the other divers. He emphasized the obedience of the men, their precision, and the fact that they had followed Graham's long-forgotten orders rather than acting aggressively toward anyone else. Brooke listened carefully, her gaze hardening as the story unfolded. When Carter finished, she nodded slowly. This changes everything. Blackfin was supposed to be dissolved decades ago. We assumed their missions ended, their operatives lost or decommissioned. But this is a breach of history itself, and it's not over. Not yet. Ortiz shivered slightly, voice low. Ma'am, they're still out there, watching, waiting, and they remember Graham. They'll follow orders maybe again. What if another old mission is triggered? Brooke's eyes narrowed. Then we stop it before it escalates. But first, we need a full debrief, containment measures, and most importantly, to understand how Graham survived so long and why Blackfin returned now. Everything is connected, and nothing can be left to chance. Carter felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. He had stepped into history and survived, but now he had to navigate it, understand it, and make sure the legacy of men like Graham did not spiral out of control. Hours passed as Graham was stabilized at the medical bay. Carter stayed nearby, watching the old man sleep, listening to the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional cough that punctuated the silence. The room was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter at the pier was only the beginning. Outside the base was a flurry of controlled chaos. Specialists in intelligence, cyber operations, and tactical containment swarmed the area. Analysts combed through decades-old records, cross-referencing every mission Graham had ever led. Officers mapped out potential threats, anticipating moves from men who had disappeared from history but were now alive and operational. Carter walked to the window, staring out at the calm waters of the bay. Waves lapped gently at the docks, in stark contrast to the violent storm he had just witnessed. The divers were gone for now, but Carter could feel their presence lingering, like shadows in the corners of his mind. Ortiz joined him, voice low. You think they'll come back? Carter didn't answer immediately. He studied the water, the horizon, the pale light reflecting off the waves. I don't know, but I know this. If history has returned once, it can return again. And when it does, we need to be ready. The medic came to update them on Graham's condition. Stable, she said, but he's not out of danger. You should rest, too. Stress and adrenaline won't help right now. Carter shook his head. I can't. Not yet. He survived, but there's more out there. Orders unfulfilled, missions unfinished. And Blackfin, they didn't act out of hostility, they acted on command. That means the real threat is still at large somewhere. The medic frowned. Then what do you do? Carter's eyes hardened. We find out what orders are left. We protect Graham, and we stop them before history repeats itself, before anyone else pays the price. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in shades of blood red and gold, Carter finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. But even then, he could feel the weight of what had happened pressing against him. Graham, the old soldiers, the missions long buried, all of it was alive in his mind. Every detail, every command, every shadow of the past demanded attention. He returned to Graham's side later that night, watching the old man sleep. The lines on Graham's face were sharper in the dim light, etched with decades of decisions, sacrifices, and regrets. Carter wondered how a man could carry so much for so long and still survive. How a mission that should have ended in the cold waters of history could resurface and demand a reckoning. A sudden beep from the monitor drew Carter's attention. Graham's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Carter, he whispered, voice hoarse. You kept them safe, now the others, they'll follow orders only if. Carter leaned closer, listening intently. If what, sir? Graham's eyes shone with a mix of fear and determination. Only if the chain of command is respected, or the past will rise again. Carter nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The threat was not just physical, It was structural, systemic, tied to the loyalty and obedience of men who had been shaped by decades-old orders. If he failed, the consequences would ripple across generations. Outside the window, the base lights blinked in the darkness. The waves whispered against the pier, and Carter knew that tonight was just a calm before another storm, a storm that would test everything he believed about history, loyalty, and duty. He took a deep breath, readying himself for the long night ahead. Because history was still alive, and its next move was inevitable. Night had fully settled over the base, cloaking the sprawling buildings and docks in shadows that flickered with the sporadic glow of security lights. Carter Briggs remained at the edge of Pier 9, the salty air thick with the scent of the harbor and lingering tension. The events of the day replayed relentlessly in his mind. The moment the divers appeared, the impossible precision of their movements, the weight of Graham's gaze, the whispered orders of men lost to history. Every second since had felt like a countdown to something inevitable. The base was quieter now, but Carter sensed the storm was far from over. Intelligence teams had combed through old records, officers were still on high alert, and Graham's condition stabilized only slightly. Yet the sense of urgency, of history pressing against the present, remained palpable. Carter knew that tonight they were vulnerable. Ortiz approached, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam across the asphalt. "You think they'll come back?" he asked, voice low, almost fearful. "They will," Carter replied, jaw tight. "They don't move like normal soldiers. They follow orders from decades ago. And those orders aren't finished. If the chain of command isn't respected, if Graham can't give them guidance, we're not dealing with regular humans anymore. We're dealing with ghosts with lethal precision." Ortiz swallowed, glancing at the dark waters where Hendricks and the others had disappeared. "I still can't believe they're real, people we thought dead, just back." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You can believe it now, and if we hesitate, history will repeat itself, and someone else will die." Inside the medbay, Graham stirred, lifting a frail hand. Carter stepped forward instinctively. "Sir, you need to rest." "I can't," Graham rasped, eyes burning with urgency. "They remember my orders, my mistakes. They need correction. They won't stop unless someone takes command." Carter's pulse quickened. "I'm here, I'll handle it, you rest." The old man coughed violently and Carter steadied him. "You've carried this alone too long. Let us finish it for you, for them, for everyone they touch if left unchecked." Graham's eyes softened briefly, relief flashing through them before pain replaced it. You're stronger than I knew, Briggs, but it is not just about them. It is about the base, the order, the chain, or chaos." The words settled like lead in Carter's stomach. The threat wasn't just immediate, it was systemic, structural. The obedience of men who had been trained, shaped, and forgotten over decades now hung like a sword over the base, the chain of command their only tether to reality. Hours later, Carter and his SEALs gathered in the strategy room with Admiral Brooke and senior intelligence officers. Large monitors displayed satellite feeds, maps of the base, and old, classified operation files detailing the original missions of UDT-21. Carter's mind raced as he traced lines connecting decades-old operations to current threats. "Carter, we need a plan," Brooks said, voice clipped but calm. "We can't control history, but we can contain it. If these men follow orders, they must be isolated until Graham or someone he trusts can direct them. Can you do it?" Carter nodded, grim. "We'll need precision, timing, and control. One wrong move and the mission triggers their full lethality. We can't fight them, we have to lead them, guide them." Ortiz's voice trembled slightly. "And if they reject the orders, if they resist?" Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we fight, but first we give them a chance to obey reason and authority." The night deepened, and Carter's team moved through the base, eyes scanning shadows, flashlights slicing through darkness. Every sound made them flinch, the creak of metal, the hiss of hydraulics, the distant echo of footsteps. They reached a lower dock where surveillance had picked up movement, shapes moving silently through the water, black suits gleaming even in moonlight. "They're here," Carter whispered. "Stay calm, stay precise. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary." The divers emerged smoothly like phantoms. Carter raised his hand slowly. "Stop. I am in command now. The mission is over. Follow my orders." For a tense moment, nothing moved. Then Hendricks lifted his mask slowly. Recognition flared between him and Carter, not hostility but calculation, waiting for confirmation. The other divers mirrored his movements, silent, obedient, but still a threat. Carter's heart pounded as he stepped forward. "Graham is stable. No further action is required. Return to standby. You will not act on any orders until given command by me." The divers froze, then slowly nodded, following the invisible chain of command Carter had asserted. Carter exhaled, relief fleeting, knowing the moment of calm was temporary. Suddenly, the night air was pierced by a gunshot, sharp, unexpected, echoing across the harbor. Carter dove to the ground, signaling his team. The sound came from the far side of the pier, outside their control. "Secure the perimeter," Carter shouted, adrenaline surging. "Everyone stay alert." Ortiz peered toward the sound, tension written across his face. "Someone's breaching the outer fences. A team is moving fast. Not UDT-21, but armed, trained, intelligence operatives maybe." Carter's mind raced. Could be a reaction team, or someone trying to exploit the chaos. Either way, we intercept them before they trigger more Blackfin activity. The SEALs spread out, weapons ready. Every shadow was a potential threat, every noise a warning. Carter's pulse roared in his ears, matching the pounding waves below the pier. Then came another sound, a metallic clang, followed by a muffled voice calling in a language Carter didn't recognize. He raised his rifle cautiously, signaling the team to move in formation. The target appeared, a figure in black, moving with calculated speed, rifle in hand. The intruder froze as Carter stepped into the moonlight. Recognition hit like a thunderbolt. The insignia on his sleeve matched a classified unit, intelligence operatives, highly trained, rogue if detached from protocol. "Stop," Carter commanded, voice firm. "You are entering a restricted zone. Identify yourself." The intruder's eyes narrowed, scanning Carter and the team. "I'm here to contain what you've unleashed," he said, voice low, clipped. "Blackfin, they've returned. Orders forgotten. Chaos imminent." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then you're late. They've been contained for now. Step aside or we engage." The intruder hesitated, calculating, then nodded once. "You don't know everything yet," he said, disappearing into the shadows with surprising speed. Carter's teeth ground together. "No," he muttered, "and I don't intend to find out the hard way." He turned back to the pier, where the divers had vanished into the water hours before. The harbor was silent again, the moon reflecting off calm waves, but Carter knew it was temporary. They were patient, precise, and loyal to orders only they understood. Graham's words echoed in his mind. If the chain of command isn't respected, chaos. Carter realized with growing certainty that the next move was already underway. Blackfin's mission, dormant for decades, was far from finished. He signaled Ortiz. "Prepare for a full lockdown. Reinforce the chain of command. Graham's condition is stable but fragile. Any misstep and the past will rise again." Ortiz nodded, and the SEALs moved efficiently, setting up barriers, alerting command, and reinforcing perimeter security. Every shadow seemed alive, every wave threatening to carry new challenges. And in the back of Carter's mind, a single chilling truth remained. The old soldiers, the lost unit of UDT-21, were still out there. Patient, silent, following orders that might drag the base and everyone in it into chaos. Carter exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the water and the darkened docks. He had survived the impossible once, led men whose history defied reason, and preserved Graham's life. but he knew, deep down, that the night was far from over. Because history didn't forgive. And it never forgot. Dawn broke slowly over the San Diego Naval Base, a pale light creeping across the water, painting the pier in soft oranges and silvers. The alarms had ceased, the flashing red lights replaced by the muted hum of early morning operations. But the tension lingered like a shadow, tense, palpable, impossible to ignore. Carter Briggs stood at the edge of the pier, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the calm waters. Everything seemed quiet, but Carter knew better. Blackfin's presence was a ghost that could reappear without warning. Inside the medical bay, Commander Miles Graham rested, pale but stable. The lines on his face were deeper now, etched by decades of leadership, sacrifice, and unimaginable burdens. Carter sat nearby, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him. The night had tested him, challenged every instinct, and now, even in the light, the danger was not fully gone. Ortiz approached, eyes tired but alert. "Do you think they're gone for good?" he asked quietly. Carter didn't answer immediately. He studied the water, the horizon stretching endlessly. The divers, Hendricks and the others, had disappeared hours ago, but their influence remained, an invisible hand guiding history, demanding respect for orders written decades earlier. Carter could feel it, the unbroken chain of command pulling taut across time. "They're out there," he said finally, voice low but firm. "And they'll obey orders, but only the right orders. Misstep, hesitation, or confusion, and we risk more than just lives. We risk history itself repeating in blood." Ortiz shivered, swallowing hard. "So what now?" Carter exhaled, fingers tightening on his rifle. "Now, we make sure the chain is respected. Graham gave them life, but I give them purpose. And we ensure nothing triggers another mission that doesn't belong in this century." Across the base, containment teams moved with precision. Surveillance footage was scoured, historical records cross-checked, and all old missions of UDT-21 cataloged to prevent the past from rising again. Every precaution, every measure, every contingency had to be perfect. The last thing Carter wanted was to awaken another forgotten mission, lost to time but deadly in execution. Hours later, Graham stirred. Carter leaned close, catching the old man's eyes, which burned with intensity despite the obvious fatigue. "They listened," Graham whispered, voice hoarse. "You did well, better than I imagined. The chain held." Carter nodded. "We contained them. No one was harmed. They followed the orders they needed. They won't move again unless directed, controlled by you or by me now, sir." Graham's hand twitched, reaching weakly toward Carter. "Briggs, promise me. You'll remember the chain, the orders, the men. Never let history repeat mistakes." "I promise, sir," Carter said, gripping Graham's hand. "I will keep the chain intact. No mission will go unchecked, no orders forgotten, and no one will get hurt because of what they once were commanded to do." A soft smile broke across Graham's face, fleeting but genuine. Relief, pride, and trust mingled in his fatting expression. "Then, it is done, Briggs, it is done for now." Outside, the calm of early morning belied the chaos of the night before. The pier was littered with debris, surveillance teams scoured the perimeter, and reinforcements ensured the base was fully secure. Carter and Ortiz walked the length of the docks, checking every corner, every shadow. The divers had vanished into the waters, but Carter knew their loyalty and precision made them a threat that could not be underestimated, even at a distance. "They're out there watching," Ortiz said quietly, voice tense, "waiting for orders, waiting for the chain to break." Carter's jaw tightened. "And we won't let it break, not while I'm here. History doesn't get a second chance unless we allow it." Suddenly, a signal came from the intelligence unit, an unexpected ping, a movement detected far from the base. Carter's head snapped toward the screen. The shadows in the water were faint, almost imperceptible, but enough to trigger every alarm he had been carrying inside his chest. "Blackfin?" Ortiz asked, voice nearly trembling. Carter didn't answer immediately. He studied the screen, mapping the movement against previous patterns. It was not random. It was deliberate, controlled, calculated, and above all, it was alive, waiting for the right moment to strike. "They're moving," Carter finally said. "Not to attack, not yet. They're watching, learning, calculating, preparing." The realization hit him with the weight of a tidal wave. Blackfin, though dormant, was patient. Decades had taught them precision, obedience, lethality. And now the chain of command had been restored, but any misstep could awaken another mission, long buried but deadly in execution. Carter turned back to Graham, who had been listening from his bed, eyes narrowed. "Sir," he said, voice soft, "we've contained the immediate threat. But the unit, they'll respond to orders again. We must anticipate their actions. They're shadows of the past moving in the present." Graham's lips quivered into a faint smile. "Briggs, you understand. That is why I trained you, prepared you. The chain must never fail, or the past will rise again with consequences. No one can stop." Carter swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing on him, heavier than any mission he had faced before. This wasn't just combat. This was history in motion. Loyalty and obedience were weapons, and failure could bring chaos beyond comprehension. Hours passed. Graham rested. Carter and his team monitored the base, scanning waters and docks, rechecking every contingency plan and coordinating with command. The day slowly rose, casting long shadows across the pier, glinting off the calm waves. Yet Carter could feel the tension, the anticipation of movement, the quiet that preceded a storm. At midday, Graham's condition improved slightly. Carter leaned closer, nodding, the strength returning to the old man's voice. "They obeyed," Graham said. "For now, but remember, the chain must remain intact always." "I know, sir," Carter replied, "and I'll make sure it does. No orders forgotten. No missions revived without control. You can rest now." Graham's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. "Briggs, I've seen. What you can do, you carry the weight. Better than I ever could. History is in your hands. Don't let it fall." Carter's jaw tightened, a sense of resolve settling deep in his chest. He understood fully now. The responsibility he bore was larger than himself, larger than the base, larger than any single mission. The past had returned to demand reckoning, and he had stepped into the chain of command to guide it, to control it, to prevent chaos. The sun rose fully over the harbor, sparkling across the water where Hendricks and the others had vanished. Carter stood at the edge of the pier, surveying the calm that masked lethal precision beneath the waves. The base was secure for now. Graham was safe for now. But the past was patient, and history didn't forgive mistakes easily. Carter took a deep breath, feeling the weight of both relief and anticipation. His team flanked him silently, each member understanding the fragile victory of the day. The past had been confronted, contained, and guided, but the threat was never truly gone. And as Carter gazed at the horizon, he realized one immutable truth: the chain must always hold. History had returned once, testing loyalty, obedience, and courage. And though they had survived, the shadows of Blackfin remained, waiting for the next signal, the next command, the next moment when the past would reach out again. Carter lowered his rifle, exhaled, and muttered under his breath, "We've survived the impossible, but the story isn't over, not by a long shot." For in the quiet morning, beneath the calm waves and shimmering pier, the ghosts of history lingered. And the chain of command, fragile yet unbroken, would be the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. And Carter knew without doubt that the next move, by the past, by Blackfin, by the chain itself, was inevitable. The story of UDT-21 had ended for now, but its legacy, its orders, its ghosts, would live forever.